All right. What's up, everyone?
All right.
Hello.
How's it going, everybody? We are back for masterclass number 5 with Ayelet Batist. Ayelet, how's it going today?
It's really, really great.
Thank you so much for joining us. We are really excited about this topic. It is something that everyone I think kind of hears a lot about, and we know it's coming, and there's like something to be done here. But I know, speaking from my own personal experience, like, how do I even get into VR? How do I even get into, I don't know, this new frontier? So I'm very excited to hear the talk today. And I think just before we get in and we introduce you a little more, we would like to, some of you who are listening today have already joined us for Masterclass before, but for those of you who haven't, we'll just give a quick administrative rundown of how this works. So we are using Crowdcast, which is an awesome platform. And over on the right here, you have chat, you can see. So as we're speaking and as the Masterclass talk is going, please feel free to join in the chat. And we've done 4 Masterclasses already, and this is one of the best parts about it, is that we're all here, we can all join in, we can all talk and kind of learn together. And it really shapes the way the Masterclass goes based on what you guys want to hear. So please let us know in the chat. But even more importantly than the chat is down below, you have questions. So you have this really cool opportunity to ask your questions and really ask Ayelet what you want to know and what you want her to answer. So the format for today is we're going to, after a quick introduction, let Ayelet dive right into the talk. And then after the talk, we'll be able to go through all of the questions that you guys asked below. And you can upvote them if you want to see a question answered. And then all of your questions will actually be answered by Ayelet. So I'm excited. I hope you guys are too. And please participate, and that's what makes for the best masterclasses.
Yeah, for sure.
So anything I forgot, Sigi? Anything we should add before we get going here?
No, I mean, like, this is our 5th masterclass, everyone. Like, the way for us to know that you're there, please participate, in the chat. Let us know what you're feeling throughout the conversation. Be sure to ask questions and upvote them, because Ayelet will answer all of them for you. I see we already have one question before we started, which is good. And right throughout while she's talking, hey Dylan, what's up? So while Ayelet is talking, you can ask the questions and start upvoting them already, this is a great platform for that. So be sure to just participate, and after that, I just want to say we'll send you the feedback survey to ask how it's been. So Ayelet.
Sigi, maybe we should get them warmed up, because sometimes people are a little bit shy in the chat. So maybe we should get everyone warmed up here, and let's we're all going to be learning together here over the next hour or so. So guys, let us know, first of all, say hi in the chat and where you're from. Where are you watching from today?
San Francisco.
Dylan,
all right.
San Francisco.
Dublin.
All right.
Nice.
So Ireland, Ottawa, Chicago,
Brooklyn, Israel. Nice.
Very cool.
Nice.
That's fun.
Don't be shy. San Francisco again.
San Francisco. What's up? Tel Aviv. All right.
Cool. So keep saying hi, guys, as you're joining us. And without further ado, let's turn this over to Ayelet. So Ayelet, thanks again for joining us. Like I said, we're excited. And before we kind of get into your talk, maybe you can give us a little bit of your background and share with everyone, what are you doing today?
Well, those are 2 different things.
Start with the background.
Start with the background, yeah. So I've done a lot of things, but I guess the relevant background. I've been working on software products from different angles for the last 12 years. So first, I was doing software development, and then in the past 7 years, more or less, I've been working as a UX and UI designer. And about 4 years ago, I joined Lightrix, which is the coolest startup in Jerusalem, if not Yeah, and I joined Lightrix, and I established the creative team, and I managed the creative team, and that was an amazing ride. And then what I've been doing recently is getting into virtual reality experience design. But really what I've been doing is kind of learning about the more scientific aspects. And I'm going to share some of these today. So I started reading about these things, and I just got so excited that I couldn't stop myself. So I've been doing that in the last months. I did study, among many other things, I studied biology and cognitive sciences for my undergraduate. So I've always had this passion for understanding how people think and how people perceive the world. And now combining that with my interest in VR and also mixed reality just gets me really excited.
Awesome. All right.
Cool.
So I think it's an interesting topic, especially that that you have this background in a bit of like cognitive science and psychology, and that now this time that VR is beginning to emerge. It's a very interesting time for people like you that come from this background and also like in the design field already, and it's crazy. So do we want to dive just right in?
Me? Yeah, sure.
All right. One thing I forgot, I don't know if we said it or not, David, but like the talk is going to be about like 35 minutes. And after that, we're going to answer the questions. So answering the questions might exceed this 1 hour that we have for this webinar. So it's okay if any of you would like to leave after 1 hour. It's all good. But we're going to be here after, just answering every question that you guys have. So, but the presentation itself is going to be now about 35 minutes, right, Ayelet?
Yeah, something like that.
All right, great. So everyone, enjoy, and yeah, the stage is yours.
Okay, so I just need to figure out how to share my screen here. Okay, 1 second.
So I will say in the meanwhile that if any of you during the talk have any technical difficulties, you can go to this URL. Should I set up? It will make you leave this chat room. I'm putting it in the chat right now. So it will make you leave the chat room for just a couple of seconds, but it will get you figured out and like really get set up, like the link says. So any technical difficulties, just go there, be set up, and come right back. And if you want to watch this on the go, you can also do it through Crowdcast's iOS app, just so you know.
Which they really did an awesome job with the iOS app, and they've recently released some new features for it, so it's really nice.
Cool.
Guys, I'll be with you in a second. I'm just figuring out how to share my screen here.
No problem. Ayelet and I had a session previously today, like just to get everything set up. The technology thing is
okay. I think I've got it. Can you see my screen now?
We can, and I'm going to make it full screen now, so it will take over.
Awesome. I'll do the same. Okay. I think this is working. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Amazing. Okay, so we're going to talk about virtual presence. Okay. So, in their book called The Fourth Transformation, authors claim that ignoring the emerging technologies of virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality would be kind of like sticking our heads in the sand. And we won't be able to do it for long anyway, at least according to them. So look at the grand picture, they say. As kids, the baby boomers generation grew up watching television. And this has had a profound impact on the kind of adults that they became. Television influenced the way their ideas spread, and it shaped their culture. The millennials generation, and especially the younger part of it, grew up on touchscreen games and social media. And this generation grew up to really rely on these technologies as the main form of communication. And this, again, has had a deep impact on every aspect, including culture and personal values and preferences. So just think about FOMO, fear of missing out, for example, and the focus that millennials have on experiences because of social media, right? Now, kids of the next generation will grow up playing virtual reality or VR games and using VR for communication. And this will essentially shape the way these kids as grown-ups learn things, buy things, socialize, and even the way that they think. If the internet and mobile mobile revolutions have made information available and accessible to all, VR will make human experiences available and accessible to all. So VR will create a kind of Wikipedia of experiences that are potentially available anywhere, anytime. So think about experiences like travel experiences, like a walking tour of the pyramids or a canoe ride in the Amazon River. Those can be accessible to anyone that have a VR headset. And we would be able to share experiences, like join dancers in a street party or play in a rock band with friends from another country. And we can even have experiences that no human have ever had before, like exploring Mars or living as a lobster or seeing a close-up of our own beating heart. In fact, any kind of use done in VR, whether it's pure entertainment or something like attending a business meeting, becomes an experience. And this is because of this magical sense of immersion that happens in VR. This magical sense of immersion is familiar to anyone who's ever tried VR, and it's really expressed by anyone who writes on VR. So almost every blog post about VR starts with this colorful personal story of the magical first experience that the writer themselves had in VR. And recently I wrote an article on VR, and I found myself doing the exact same thing, talking about the magic. And this immersion really does feel like a wonder, like magic. Now, as consumers of VR, we can simply enjoy this magic without asking ourselves how this sense of immersion actually happens. But from the perspective of designers creating virtual reality experiences, either now or in the next years, we really need to get a better understanding of what this immersion really is and how it happens. There are many questions to ask. For example, can one only be immersed or not immersed in virtual reality, or are there maybe degrees of immersion? So scientific research done on VR suggests that there are, in fact, different degrees of immersion. Instead of immersion in the context of scientific research, the term presence is often used, referring to the degree to which the user actually feels as if they are present in the virtual environment. We can also refer to things like social presence, or how much the user feels connected to other people in VR, and self-presence, how much the user feels that their avatar is actually them. VR designers should probably ask themselves some of the questions that scientists have been looking into, like, can we control this degree of presence? What are the consequences? And maybe, should we actually aspire to reach the highest possible level of virtual reality presence? Maybe not. But perhaps the first question to consider is what really causes different degrees of VR presence? And actually, existing research studies already provide some very interesting insights about this. So the first aspect that makes VR immersive is pretty obvious. Even before virtual reality, as graphic design content came closer and closer to real-world visual content, the sense of immersion increased. So moving from games with 2D graphics to games with 3D graphics and then from third-person perspective to first-person perspective games has made desktop games more realistic and more engaging. And in VR, we go way farther, right? We take the user and we put the user inside the visual content. The headsets that the users wear present each eye with the right version of the visual data, so that we end up with this 3D image that covers our entire field of vision, at least as far as the headset allows us to see. But it's not enough to just put the user inside the content, right? When we think about it, the visual illusion really begins when the sensory input perfectly matches the movement of our head. And this is true for both visuals and for sounds. Matching visuals and sounds with this bodily sensation of movement is the first step from moving from just seeing the content to actually experiencing the content. This intense effect that is produced by this very simple aspect of virtual reality is nicely demonstrated in this classic experiment done at the Virtual Human Interaction Lab at Stanford University. So this lab, founded by Jeremy Bailinson, conducts research on many aspects of virtual reality experiences, from what creates powerful illusions to the interesting short-term and long-term effects of all kinds of VR experiences. In this VR experience, which the researchers named the pit or the hole, a participant first sees a virtual environment that was designed to look exactly like the physical room that he was in before putting on the headset. So the virtual environment looks exactly like the physical room. Then after a short while, the floor in the middle of the room drops down and reveals this deep hole or a pit. And across this pit, there's a wooden plank that allows crossing over to the other side. The participant is then asked to walk on the wooden plank onto the other side of the pit. Now, experiment after experiment, all participants show very similar reactions to this experience. So they all become stiff and they're afraid to take the first step on the plank. And one participant described his feeling like this: I'm walking across a rickety plank spanning a 30-foot deep pit. Now, of course, there is no plank and there is no pit. The scene is a digital mirage. But those facts don't seem to mean much to my brain that can't quite disbelieve what my eyes are telling it. Virtual reality is so realistic, so immersive, that it feels something like an actual experience. So the starting degree of immersion or virtual reality presence is actually very high, very convincing. But I'm going to show you that we can actually go deeper. The next level of immersion comes when the sense of touch is added to the game. While we are less aware of it, touch is a constant sensory input that we highly rely on in our real-world experiences. So we may not always notice the sense of touch, or we may only notice it when we touch something unusual. But in real experiences, it is, of course, there all the time. And its absence or its mismatch to what our brain is expecting immediately tells our brain that we are not really there touching that object right now. Now, to bridge this gap, touch feedback or haptic feedback is now commonly supplied in virtual reality by hand controllers, like the ones made by HTC Vive or Oculus. There's a lot to say about haptic feedback and a lot more to research and implement, but for the purpose of this talk, it's enough for me to say that, or it's enough for us to notice that haptic feedback is extremely gratifying in VR and that it adds to the sense of presence in VR. Okay, so far we've looked at the basic building blocks of VR immersion. Visuals that are synced with the way a user moves their head or moves in the room have a big impact on immersion. But when a user moves their hands and only see the hand controllers move in the VR scene, or when the user looks down and instead of seeing their legs, they kind of see themselves as if they were floating in the air, these missing visuals really limit the possible level of immersion. And specifically, the sense that is being disturbed here is our sixth sense of proprioception. So I'll talk a little bit about what proprioception is. Proprioception is the sensation of where our body is right now in relation to the space around us and what is our body posture. So our brain constantly holds a kind of mental model or mental representation of our body. And this model is, of course, dynamic, right? When we move, the model gets updated all the time. One of the interesting aspects of this sense of proprioception is that this is a sense that is actually based on the inputs coming from our other senses. So our brain creates this model based on the flow of inputs coming from our sight and our sense of touch, and from information about our balance coming from our ears, and information about our posture that is coming from our muscles. So our brain uses all of these inputs to create this sense of proprioception. When we move our hands, but in virtual reality, but we only see the controllers move, our brain receives information from our eyes that is conflicting with the information that is coming from our muscles, right? Because our muscles are telling our brain that our hands are there, but our eyes are saying something else. So this is where the disturbance arises from, okay? But with motion tracking in use by sensors, for example, we can track the motion of users and then allow users to control avatar bodies in virtual reality. And this addition of being able to look down and see a visible body that is moving in sync with our movements increases the sense of immersion or virtual reality presence. I hope I hope everyone are with me right now. It's gonna get lighter from here on.
We're with you. We're with you. All good.
Okay. All right. If by the way someone has a question, so Sagi, you guys can let me know, right? If someone is asking about the terminology I'm using or something like that.
For sure. By the way, just to say that Ayelet right now, when she's presenting, she does not see the chat window, but David and I do see the chat window. So feel free to ask any questions if you need to ask right now in the chat. But if you don't, and you can save it for later, ask on the bottom and start uploading those.
Okay. Moving on. Okay. So we've said that controlling an avatar can increase this sense of virtual reality presence. Now, recalling the concept of self-presence that we mentioned before, or how much a user feels that their avatar is actually them, we can make an interesting distinction here between controlling or puppeteering an avatar and actually feeling fully embodied in that avatar. To understand this better, I want to describe a classic experiment often used to demonstrate how the sense of proprioception works. I first learned about this experiment 10 years ago when I studied cognitive sciences, and I have to say that every time I read about it again or think about it again, it still amazes me. I think it's really cool. So this experiment is called the rubber hand illusion, and it goes like this. Participants sit next to a table and they see a rubber hand on the table in front of them, while their real hand is hidden under the table. Now, they see the rubber hand being stroked by a soft brush, while at the same time they feel a synchronized touch on their real hand, which is under the table. Okay, so they see a touch on the rubber hand and they feel a touch on their real hand. Now, After a short while of providing their brain with this alternative but synchronized visual input, participants gain a sense of ownership of the rubber hand. So they feel as if their own hand is placed on the table where the rubber hand is. And then when the researcher threatens the rubber hand with a knife, participants instinctively jump and move their real hand away. The rubber hand illusion and many similar experiments that were done since teach us about how the sense of proprioception really works. So the sense of touch, synchronized with the sight of touch, right, seeing the touch, doesn't just help our brain to know that objects are really there. Strangely enough, it confirms to our brain that our body is really there, where our eyes say it is. Very strange. At least I think it's very strange. Coming back to the concept of virtual reality presence, we can say that we can roughly identify different degrees of presence. So touching an object without seeing avatar hands, but when we are getting haptic feedback, creates a certain level of immersion. Then seeing the avatar hands move accurately but not receiving haptic feedback creates a new level of immersion. But combining both, that is, seeing the avatar body touched and feeling touch at the same time, creates a much higher level of embodiment. And some scientists refer to this level of immersion as full presence. Returning to the rubber hand illusion, we can see that the mental model of our body, a mental model that is generated in our brain, is really very, very flexible, right? In our brain, we have an area that is mapping the human body, and it's often called the homunculus. Sorry if my pronunciation here is not perfect. And in this brain area, areas that are more sensitive to touch or have better motor control take up more space, giving this map the depiction of a kind of distorted little human. Now, Jaron Lanier, who was a pioneer in early research on avatar bodies in VR, coined the term homuncular flexibility to describe this flexibility in how the brain maps the human body. And Lanier found that VR users could quickly learn to control avatar bodies that were quite different from normal human bodies, like avatar bodies with longer hands or avatar bodies with many more than just 2 hands. And this insight has led researchers to test just how flexible this mental model of the body is. So could people learn to skillfully control a body that has 3 hands or a body that has a tail? So apparently the answer is generally yes, they can. So as in the rubber hand illusion, when participants of this tail avatar experiment learn to control the avatar tail by swinging their hips from side to side, they felt greater ownership of their avatar body. And then they felt anxiety when this tail seemed to be threatened. Okay, so the brain was, yeah, it is crazy. It is crazy. And it seems that their brain was really quick in accepting the news, right? That the body now has a tail, a tail that they can control.
Crazy.
And yeah. And indeed, many findings show that as long as touch and sight are synchronized, our brain is quite willing to learn and adjust its concept of how the body looks like or where the body is. And these findings can have many interesting applications in VR experience design. And we're going to see some of them now. Okay. So we know that our mental self-image can impact how we feel and behave, right? Our mental self-image can dictate our body posture and body language, and even the decisions that we make. But we also know that this can go the other way around. So many advise us to dress for the job we want, or to fake it till we make it, right? And this phenomenon of changing our self-image through the outer expressions of it is widely evident. In her popular TED Talk, Your Body Language Shapes Who You Are, Amy Cuddy shares that changing our body posture to portray more confidence can actually make us feel more confident and be more assertive and charismatic. This inverse body-mind effect, where the perception of the body affects self-image and mood, apparently goes beyond the physical body posture and extends to the mental representation of our body. And this is sometimes called the Proteus effect. Don't worry, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Proteus effect and explain what it is. So, named after, and there's no test afterwards about all of these new terms. So
we should have a book of like terms.
A what?
Book of terms.
A book of terms. Yeah, I can upload something after the talk. But actually, it's not the essence. It's not that important. I'm just mentioning those terms.
Okay.
So, named after this Greek god named Proteus, who had the ability to change shape, the Proteus effect is the tendency of people to be affected by their digital avatars and their social networking personas. When it comes to virtual reality, because it's so immersive, and because our brain can quickly get used to new types of body representations like we saw, the Proteus effect in virtual reality can be very, very powerful. So when people see themselves, for example, as a casually dressed avatar, they will later on feel and behave in a more free and casual way. And when they see themselves as a formally dressed avatar, they will later on feel and behave in a more formal way. The Event Lab, which is another virtual reality research lab, this one is in Barcelona, led by Dr. Mel Slater. This lab has done many research studies that demonstrate this Proteus effect in VR. In one of these studies, participants saw themselves as having the body of a child. They could see their child body in this virtual mirror, and they saw other grown-up avatars from a low viewpoint, as one would see grown-ups through the eyes of a child. After these child avatar sessions, when the participants returned to the real world, both their perceptions of sizes of objects in the world and their perceptions of themselves have shifted. So objects felt slightly bigger, and for at least some time after the experiment, participants felt and acted more childishly, being less authoritative and less confident. Now, remember the rubber hand illusion that showed that synchronized touch is what makes the body illusion work? Remember that? So in this and in similar experiments, when people just saw themselves in a virtual mirror without feeling and seeing their avatar body touched, this Proteus effect didn't really happen. Okay? But when people saw themselves in a virtual mirror and in the real world, they felt a touch on their hand or on their face, and they could see that touch happening in the virtual mirror at the same time, that's when the magic happened. That's when the Proteus effect happened. I hope you're all with me. Basically, what I'm saying is that seeing the avatar body touched is very important. So we could say that without the touch, people saw themselves as a child avatar, but with the touch, they felt embodied in the child avatar. And that has made them really feel like a child.
This is so cool.
Wait for it. Now, this induced Proteus effect can also be shown to create empathy for others or affect biases. So in another experiment done at the same lab, participants were made to feel embodied in avatars with a skin color that was different or very different than their own. So, for example, white participants saw themselves in a virtual mirror as having a dark skin color and different facial features. Now, compared to the way these participants felt before the experiment, after the experiment, there was this shift in their biases for dark-skinned people, basically making them a little less racist, at least to some extent, and for some time after the experiment. These kinds of effects were reproduced in many experiments, often showing that seeing the world through the eyes of another in virtual reality creates an empathy that is very, very visceral. And this visceral empathy affects mindset and opinion outside of the virtual environment. So, for example, when people got to wear the avatar of a person taking the other side of this of a diplomatic negotiation, they were later on more willing to compromise in a real negotiation in real life. Now, if this wasn't interesting enough, what about wearing our own avatars? So would the Proteus effect be stronger if we were embodied in avatars that are similar to us? And what about avatars that look exactly like us, but have different personas or behave differently? So this interesting experiment shows that embodiment in a self-like avatar can induce empathy for a future version of ourselves and get people to change their tendencies as a result. So in this experiment, young students entered a virtual reality in which they saw themselves in the body of their future older self. So how was this done? Researchers took photos of the participants before the experiment. They turned those photos into a 3D model, and then they generated this realistic older version avatar for each participant from their photos, okay? And the experiment showed that after being embodied in a future self avatar in virtual reality, participants, perhaps because they felt empathy for their future selves, were more inclined to save money for the future instead of getting immediate rewards. So this is pretty interesting, right? I mean, perhaps instead of being lectured to save money for the future or reading books, all we need to do to become more financially responsible is to spend some time each month as our future selves, right? As our older selves.
It's like the ultimate version of the marshmallow test.
Yes, it's true. Only this teaches you how to succeed in the marshmallow test. Okay, and we might ask ourselves, so what else could this be used for? Can this also work for being healthier or for exercising more? And again, according to some studies, the answer is generally yes. So in experiments where participants saw their fat self-version avatar lose weight as they themselves ran on a treadmill, participants were later on more inclined to exercise more, both during and after the experiment. And in fact, VR avatar embodiment proved to affect behavior not just when the avatar looked a certain way, but even more so when it was acting in a certain way in a certain context. So in this cool experiment, some participants were given the experience of flying like a superhero. So they could fly like a superhero over this urban virtual reality landscape. And after this experience, those participants that were flying like superheroes were significantly quicker and more likely to help the experimenter pick up some pens that fell on the floor when compared to participants who only had a VR experience of flying in a helicopter. So it seems possible that moving like a superhero in virtual reality has primed certain personality traits and certain behaviors for these participants. I hope you're all with me, right? So yeah, I think this is really, really cool. Now, other research studies also suggest that this kind of behavior shifts can have long-lasting effects. So in this experiment, done again at the Virtual Human Interaction Lab at Stanford, people were embodied in an avatar that was cutting down this redwood tree in a forest. So participants felt haptic feedback that simulated the vibrations of the chainsaw that they were supposedly holding in their hands. And they also saw and heard the tree falling and hitting the ground in virtual reality. Now, right after the experience, people were shown to use less paper compared to people that didn't experience this full tree cutting scene. This is quite interesting. But I think that the most interesting part is that people reported that even long after the experiment, whenever they saw paper products in a supermarket, they remembered the sensation of cutting down the tree. I think this is really incredible. So that experience turned into this very realistic memory. And that memory had very realistic effects for those people.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Now, at this point, some of you probably feel a little worried. I know that I felt a little worried when I was reading more and more of these articles. Right? I mean, would every convincing virtual reality experience have such a long-lasting effect?
Yeah.
Well, at least we might think we'll always know which memories are real and which were only virtual reality experiences, right? We will always be able to differentiate. Well, actually, it's not so clear. Yeah. So looking at this next experiment done at the same lab will probably not make us less concerned. And this one was actually done with kids. So again, using photos of these young kids that participated in this experiment, researchers generated their doppelgangers, or avatars that looked exactly like those kids. Then when the kids put on the VR headset, they saw their own doubles, their doppelgangers, swimming underwater with whales around them. Okay, so they saw avatars that looked just like them swimming with whales. A week later, those kids were brought back to the lab, and it turned out that about 50% of them formed false memories following this VR scene. So half of the kids believed that they had physically been to SeaWorld and that they had physically swum with whales sometime in the past. Now, this effect is apparently stronger for kids. Okay, so kids are known to be easier for inducing false memories in general. But this does highlight a very important understanding on virtual reality. So although grown-ups might realize that every one of the virtual environments that they're in is fake, the experiences that they have in them are genuine. So if virtual reality gets people to feel immersed and present in the virtual world, when they are there, they gain authentic experiences, just as they would in the real world. And people remember virtual reality experiences not as a memory of something that they saw, like something they saw in a movie, but as something that actually happened to them. Feeling identified with what we see in virtual reality can have all sorts of results. And it can be used for all kinds of purposes. So some therapeutic purposes can be treating phobias or post-traumatic stress disorder. And there already are clinics that are offering these kinds of treatments. But it's not difficult to think of how this powerful presence in virtual reality could be used for harm or exploitation, and we don't even have to go that far. Even today, visual exposure to a brand or a product is effective in priming people to like that brand and to buy that product. And the more immersive virtual reality is, the more powerful virtual reality marketing will get. So seeing repeating realistic occurrences of a product in VR is one thing, but what about seeing your doppelganger use that product? Or what about seeing yourself as an avatar using that product? Marketing in VR can get a lot more intrusive, and the effect of priming in VR can get a lot stronger. And perhaps for this, for a final crescendo, let's mention this one last concern-raising experiment. So in short, people got embodied in an avatar, and they saw themselves as that avatar in a virtual mirror. When they moved, the avatar moved, etc. But this time, a new element was added. So participants wore a haptic feedback device that could generate vibrations to their throat, giving them the sensation that their vocal cord was vibrating. After after an initial stage of getting participants to feel fully embodied in the avatar, as we've seen in other experiments, when participants looked in the mirror, they could see their avatar speak when they themselves were not actually speaking. And when their avatar spoke, they felt vibrations in their throat sent through the haptic feedback device. Yeah. Now, after this experience, participants said that they felt as if they themselves were speaking. And some participants even felt confused or unsure of whether they were actually speaking or not. So this is a little bit quite alarming. Now, while this happened in very specific and deliberate experiment conditions, it emphasizes even more how likely we are to accept false sensations and create false memories, which can even jeopardize our own sense of agency. Okay, so no more alarming experiments now. Zooming out again and considering what people usually write about when they write on the technology of virtual reality, the common and familiar concerns that people write about are that it's not comfortable enough to use, that it might cause dangerous distractions, and that it might turn out to be highly addictive. But once we really start to understand all of the different aspects, wonderful and new, of this new medium, and all of the aspects of the experiences that it allows, we realize that there really are so many other issues to consider. Without actually looking at the evidence, like we just did, both positive autosuggestion and psychological threats of virtual reality are being regarded as kind of science fiction stuff. But when we think about it, science fiction stuff are labeled as such because of this perceived distance between them and the real contemporary science stuff. But unlike science fiction stuff, virtual reality is really here, and it comes with its psychological effects built in. So this is really more science reality. Mm-hmm. As with every new technology disruption, it's going to take some time before we truly realize all of the effects that virtual reality is going to have on people's lives. But I think that there are some takeaways that we can take with us now. So in short, we need to get more informed. We need to consider new VR possibilities in depth and for the long run. We need to choose the right side, and we probably should get busy creating safety tools and guidelines and getting the information out there. And I'm going to elaborate just a little bit on every one of those before we conclude. So getting informed. So we've accepted that to be a good UX designer, one needs to learn some basic cognitive psychology and to aim to understand how users think and how they experience interfaces. VR experience designers have increased power when it comes to affecting users. And with it, of course, comes increased responsibility. So to be good virtual reality experience designers, we probably need to get much more informed. I think this means not just reading about the technology or design aspects of virtual reality, but also reading about the psychological and physiological short-term and long-term aspects. And now, this information will probably become more and more accessible with time, which leads me to the next point. Get the information out there. So be part of those thinking and writing on these aspects of VR, and help to get these kind of understandings to the minds of future creators of virtual reality experiences. Consider users and test. Great experience and interaction designers already know this. We need to consider the users. We need to put the users at the center of our design process. and to test and to see how real people actually react to what we've created. There are no news here, right? But in VR, perhaps, we need to also look at people's reaction before and after the actual virtual reality experience, and again, to consider short-term and long-term effects. We may think of virtual reality as something that is between a computer game and a theme park ride. And as something that's closer to a theme park ride, it really requires better safety regulations. So we might need to get more specific when we test the quality of a VR experience, since we won't always want to aim for the most engaging and the most gripping experience, not always at least. And of course, we'd want to protect kids, not just delight or engage them. And I think we really need to start thinking about this early. This last one is a suggestion on a more personal note. Choose the right side. So if and when you're joining others in creating the next VR experiences, features, and tools, join those that plan to make good use of this new technology. Join those that are enhancing education, therapy, communication, entertainment, and generally aiming to benefit users and not those aiming to benefit at the expense of users. Thank you.
Woo! Claps. Clap emojis in the chat. Clap emojis. Crazy. I'm pretty mind-blowing. Pretty crazy stuff.
A lot to take in, because it's you touched on so many different subjects, and that I kind of knew that, okay, yeah, there's a lot to be done with VR, but I didn't understand really how deep of an effect it can have on people. And it starts making me think about, okay, that all the ethical considerations and things that you brought up, like, how do we govern stuff like this in the future? You know, what if someone does something in VR that's, you know, against the law? Like, if other people really are, if people who are interacting with someone who does that thing, like, are affected by it just as severely as they would be in person, like you said, then should the person who did it in VR be, you know, arrested, or should they be held accountable for it? You know, if you kill someone in VR, is that murder? Like, I mean, you know, obviously an extreme example, but you have this real power here. It's not just a video game anymore.
Yeah, I see that I was able to bring you to my world. Now you're asking yourself the same kind of questions that I've been asking myself.
Crazy. Yeah. The experiments were definitely, you know, crazy. And also, you know, this whole, the fact that the psychological effects that you can create, it's pretty scary, the things that you can do. Like, it's also, you know, inspiring, probably, the good things that you can do. So lots of great stuff to do with trauma victims, I guess, and a lot of, like, work to be done. It's going to be really helping mankind. But on the other hand, we lost Ayelet for a second. It's pretty, David, it's pretty crazy, huh? Yeah.
Guys, we have some really good questions lining up here, and I actually asked a few myself that I really wanted to hear. I usually don't even do that, but there's a bunch of questions that I have, and I have more in my head as well. So everyone listening, please ask your questions, and as soon as Ayelet gets back online, we will, it says accepted and connecting here, we will get into those.
And let's take a couple of...
There is a book that I finished reading, and I wonder if anyone else here has read it, Ready Player One. They're making a movie soon. Spielberg's directing the movie. But as she was talking about the haptic suits and getting into, like, exactly kind of how you can feel it. Nice. Okay, so a few people read it also. This is all I was thinking about, is just scenes from Ready Player One. Highly recommend it for everyone to read.
I should read it. You recommended it to me a few times already.
Yeah, it's really nice. It's like it's like fun, exciting, you know, adventure, and then there's all this nostalgia of old, like, 80s and 90s video games and music and all of these references. Really, really nice book.
I should totally read it. Totally. Crazy stuff.
So can you message Ayelet and see if
Yeah,
it's coming back
yeah.
on?
I'll try to catch her for a second. Let's see what's up. I think when she closed her presentation, then it kicked her out for a second. So let's see. Is she not here? Like, can we not invite her back up?
She's invited. It says accepted and connecting.
Okay.
I'm going to remove and re-invite her. Let's try
Okay.
that.
Okay. Everyone, in the meanwhile, you can take the time to read through the questions and upvote the ones that you want to hear first. Okay.
See, Dylan asked the question I was thinking too. I was thinking something similar as well. How does a front-end or back-end developer get into learn about VR programming?
Yeah.
It feels like there's so much to be done here. And, 2 years ago, it was like this, crazy world that just wasn't accessible to anyone and just kind of like, okay, VR is amazing, but, what can I do with it? But now there's tons of people already working on it and developing things, and, we're really advancing. There's multiple products, there's multiple systems that you can use. So I also want to hear the answer to this question, because I feel like it is accessible now, and I just don't know how to get in and start doing it, but I want to.
It's a good question because it's still not mainstream. So like us as people that, if you want to get into it, I guess if someone wants to get into it, they now there's a lot more opportunities, but it's still not like the mainstream of user experience. So I think it's super, super important to be informed at this early stage right now. Like this kind of presentation that Ayelet gave is very important for us to understand the implications of such, a technology that's coming right at us like a tsunami. And it's still not, it didn't hit yet. It's like still you can see it in the ocean, but it didn't hit the surface yet in a way that's, mainstream and has that crazy effect. But it's coming. You can't stop it.
But also just think about the complexities if you're designing a product or a VR experience that she was explaining. You really have to be able to walk in someone else's shoes and understand and empathize with them and understand what they would do. And it's just way more complex than designing, let's say a website or an app. It almost feels, as I think about it, it almost feels petty that I'm thinking about problems of navigation and, the user onboarding for this, when there's a VR experience that can be had that's, hey, let's back.
Yeah. Hey.
That's VR experience that can be had that's just navigation. No, you need to be able to walk in someone else's shoes and think what they're thinking and feel what they're feeling and think about different personalities and handicaps and talents and how it affects each one of them. It just feels, it almost feels like petty for me to think about, oh no, let's think about navigation on a website now.
It's crazy.
Guys, what did I miss? I got sucked into another reality.
Were you gone? We didn't notice.
Some gossip.
So we have some awesome questions lined up. I think we should just start diving into them and go from there. What do you say?
Okay.
So the most upvoted question, we'll just start at the top. So guys, everyone listening, if you upvote, then that will make the questions jump over each other and that will change the order. So I'm just going from the top going down. So the first question we have from Dylan is, how does a front-end or back-end web programmer start to learn about VR programming?
About VR programming?
Yeah, what advice can you give about getting into developing for VR, creating products in VR?
Okay, so first I have to say, I'm not the best person to ask, right? I'm not, I did learn some basic Unity development for VR, but I'm definitely not an expert on this. Just as I approached it, you can approach it, there are many, many resources online. And actually getting started, at least for development, I think is pretty easy. There are so many tutorials online. I don't know if you know what, I could post here later some great posts that I've read that listed some steps that one can take if they want to do this. So I'll be happy to share those, but I didn't write those posts, yeah, and there's an abundance of them.
Awesome. Any links that you have here, we'll share with everyone, and we'll also share. We're going to send a roundup email at the end. So any links that you have, we'll share with the audience.
Yeah.
And
sure. What I would add is that, sorry, I think really that well, you know, I mean, it's difficult to get started with anything, I guess, but technically development for VR, I don't think that the challenge, like the real challenges are the complexity of it all. Okay, so understanding how this new medium works, not just stuff that we talked about today, but just, you know, thinking in 3D. You know, there's just so many things, new concepts to learn, which I think makes it very interesting. Yeah.
Cool. And Dylan, feel free to comment if you'd like us to expand on that some more. But I will jump to the next question from Eyal. Can you say something about the implementation of a sense of presence as opposed to telepresence?
As opposed to?
Telepresence.
Telepresence? I'm not sure I got that. A sense of presence versus what?
Eyal, if Eyal would like to expand, but he asked as opposed to telepresence. So he's asking about the difference between implementing a sense of presence versus telepresence.
I would love to refer to that question. I'm not really sure what telepresence is.
By the way, we can invite Eyal on stage to ask the question.
Sure, or so, maybe he can just...
Let's go to the next question for now, but Eyal, feel free to clarify in the chat, or we can invite you on as well.
Yeah.
So do the same phenomenons that happen that you were talking about that happen with a VR avatar, do they also happen with non-VR avatars, such as like in a video game? Maybe to a lesser extent?
Yeah, exactly. So we've mentioned the Proteus effect, which is the tendency of people to get affected by their avatars or digital personas in general. So that apparently does happen. But what I was trying to show is that the higher the immersion, the more this happens, in a sense. Mm-hmm. Okay, and this kind of makes sense, right? The more you feel that some experience is really, really happening, you know, it'll have a stronger impact on you. And so I would assume that the Proteus effect would be stronger as well. But yes, apparently research says that it does happen with other kind of digital experiences.
So basically, it's
more
of a spectrum. It's not kind of a binary thing. You're either
Absolutely.
in or out. It's kind of as you dive deeper down the rabbit hole, you're gonna feel more and more the phenomenon is going to be stronger for you. The effect is going to be stronger for you.
Absolutely, and I have to say that I did simplify a lot of things because, you know, I wanted to kind of give the big picture, okay, and then like mention some terms and kind of link them together and explain how it all works. And so my point was, yes, that there are different degrees of immersion, that one can be more immersed, but I did simplify things to some extent. And when you read scientific articles, you will see that it's not as like clear. It's not exactly that, I don't know, only receiving haptic feedback gives you this level, and then only seeing your avatar but not receiving haptic feedback gives you that level, and it's not exactly like that. So yes, there are like different degrees of immersion, but...
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I think that kind of ties into the next question was basically, or maybe you can expand on this a bit. So these, can you still create a type of intense psychological experience with AR? Is that kind of a platform that could be worked on with, you know, augmented reality to maybe, I'm picturing like maybe you have not yourself, but like an avatar walking next to you or something like this, and can you create real strong psychological experiences this way with almost, you know,
in augmented reality, but not, or I assume that the question is for both augmented reality and mixed reality. I would assume.
Okay.
Yeah?
Actually, what's the difference between augmented reality and mixed reality?
Oh dear. I mean, I know the difference, but you're challenging my English here. Basically, they're both layers of visual content that are layered on seeing the real world, right? So you see the real world, and then you see added graphic content as a layer over that. But mixed reality shows you graphic content or visual content that refers to to the real world, right? So if you see a room in mixed reality, you might see an object that is placed on certain things in the room and would look realistic, right? You could see, let's say this, okay? In virtual reality, you would see an apple, a virtual apple on a virtual table in a virtual everything. Okay. In mixed reality, you would see a real table, and you would see a virtual apple perfectly placed, hopefully perfectly placed on your real table, and it would look realistic. And in augmented reality, you would see a virtual apple layered over your view of your real table, but it would not really look like it's placed on the table.
Okay. Yeah? So like Pokemon Go is augmented reality, not mixed reality. Would that make sense?
Yeah.
Or a lot.
Yeah, exactly. HoloLens, Microsoft HoloLens, what they're trying to do, anyone who's interested in mixed reality should just watch their videos or similar videos to you very quickly understand what mixed reality is and what's the difference.
Okay, cool.
Wait a minute, was that the question? No, the question was if you can get the same kind of effect in augmented reality or any kind of psychological effect, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so I don't know the answer. I would assume, again, that some psychological effects will occur. And again, the more immersed you are, the stronger the effects. So maybe in augmented reality, it can have some effect, and then in mixed reality. So I don't know if in mixed reality it would be the strongest, because you feel you are in real life, right? But you see, I would assume that in mixed reality it would be like the strongest, because you're as immersed as you can be, right? You touch the real world, you see the real world, and you see some extra content. But then again, you don't necessarily touch that virtual content. So it depends. But generally, I would assume that the more immersed you feel, the stronger the effect.
Okay. It's really interesting that you have like this kind of spectrum, and I imagine as we start, designing more and more products for VR, that you have to constantly think about the spectrum and the level of immersion that you're creating, or the intensity of the psychological experience that you're giving to someone who's supposed to be using your product or experience, whatever you're designing.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so next question from Eyal is, how easy or not easy is it to disrupt the embodiment experience of any of the types that you mentioned?
That's a good question. Any of the types, I assume, Eyal, you mean the different degrees of immersion, or the different, I assume that's what you mean. How easy it is to disrupt? Well, basically, every time you create a conflict between the different, in the synchronization of the different sensory inputs, every time you create a conflict, you're disturbing the sense of immersion and the effect, right? So if what you see doesn't really match your movement, or it does, and then all of a sudden there are glitches and it doesn't, or what you see matches your bodily movements, but what you hear doesn't, etc. Like every one of those can disrupt or disturb the sense of immersion. If you're asking like which is the worst, I don't know. I don't know. It would be interesting to see if there's. It would be interesting to research this or see if research was done on this. But I would assume that a mismatch in like the visual input would immediately disrupt the illusion. And this is what is usually mentioned on like Oculus developers' website and similar resources. They basically tell you do everything you can not to disrupt this synchronization between the visual input and the movement of the head.
Ayelet clarified he clarified the question in the chat, so I'll read this to you. So in the real world, a sudden noise or a push is considered part of the wholesome experience. Right. In VR, it would take me out of that experience. Like, yes or no? Like,
not necessarily. No. I mean, if you see someone pushing you and you feel the push, then it adds to your virtual presence. It might not be pleasant, but you would feel immersed. But if you feel that you're being pushed and you don't see that happening in virtual reality, then yes. But again, it goes to the mismatch of sensory inputs. Right?
So, yeah, it's almost like you're waking someone up from a deep dream or something like that. I can imagine, you're sitting there and something's going on, and you feel like someone's tapping you on the shoulder. Your time's up. It's like, wait a second. Where's it coming from? Who's talking to me?
Yeah, I mean, if you're it's interesting to ask or to research the situation where you're fully embodied in an avatar and you're like really immersed and you've been in this very long virtual reality session and you're being disturbed like this. I mean, who knows? Maybe could have some unpleasant effects or not.
I read some talks like on the same subject of kind of coming out of the immersion experience. I read a few articles about people who claim that there's almost like a slight depression after coming out of like a long VR experience. Have you heard anything about that?
No, tell me more. You?
I'll share one article in particular I read. It was by Tobias von Schneider. Yeah, and he said that he was playing around, with VR and would have like kind of like, let's say like a very long VR experience. I don't know, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, immersed, and then afterwards, kind of like coming back into the real world, there's like this slight like level of almost depression. And I mentioned it before. It makes me think again about Ready Player One. I don't know if you read the book, but I mentioned it when we lost connection with you for a second. That I read the book Ready Player One, which is all about people like kind of this near future world where everyone is fully immersed all the time with haptic suits and kind of living in what they call the oasis.
Yeah.
So highly recommend it if you haven't read it yet.
Yes, sorry, I forgot. So what was the question? Or
I think you answered it, actually. It was about the disruption effect. Okay, practically, let's get into like just a practical question here. If you want to start working with VR, can you recommend any sort of gear or setup or anything that would be like good value for money, let's say?
Again, I'm not the expert on this, but I would be happy to publish here some posts that I've read, supposedly written by people who know a lot about this, but I'm not an expert. I can just share
which kind of rigs? Which rigs have you used, or
I've tried Samsung Gear and Oculus and HTC Vive and Google Cardboard and yeah.
I haven't.
It really. I mean, it's a. I mean, if you're asking about the differences again, just I think I would just Google it and read about it. Or differences in price and the specification, etc. But
when you use something like Google Cardboard, I've never tried it, but I mean, the Google Cardboard is basically it's like taking your phone or something, right, and putting it inside of
Samsung Gear
like
is the
a
same.
headset. Okay. So is that really able to create immersion, like an immersive effect, the way that something like Oculus Rift can?
So it's a headset, and it does what a headset does. It matches what you see to the movement of your head, and what you hear, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And in that aspect, yes, it can. When you use HTC Vive or Oculus with the hand controllers, then that gives you another level of another sensory feedback, right? And that adds to the sense of immersion. And if you don't use anything like that with the Samsung Gear, because you're just using your phone, then you're not as immersed, etc. Right? But as a headset, of course, I'm not going to compare the graphics, the resolution, the blah, blah, blah. Of course, there are differences. But I think if we're asking about the principle or the basics, then
it works.
Yeah.
Okay.
As a headset,
cool.
It works in the same fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still like I don't know. I feel for one of the first times in my career that I'm like looking at like this new technology, like how I was looking at old people looking at websites back then. I'm saying, what, that works? Like you could do that, being resistant to it. But I think, like you said, it's amazing that you could take a phone, basically put it inside of Google Cardboard and have an immersive experience.
Yeah.
So we have one more question here. And the question is there a VR version of the placebo effect, like a certain behavior being impacted by a VR experience?
A certain behavior, the placebo effect is basically expecting something, some phenomenon, and then experiencing it, even though there was no an external cause, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how would you translate that to VR? Expecting something to happen in VR, but not having it actually happen. I mean, if you translate it like that, then yeah, I mean, if you expect something to happen and it doesn't really happen, but your expectation creates the effect, then it's just a generic placebo effect, and I assume you can have that in VR. But if the question was something else, then I'm not sure. But
But it makes sense what you're saying. That if you, I think almost the entire immersive experience that you described and all the different the effects that it can create are basically the placebo effect completely. You're viewing something happening which isn't really happening, and therefore you're actually affected by it.
No, not exactly, because it's not really happening, but it is really happening to you. And that's, I think, one of the strong takeaways that I hope people take from my talk, that it might not really happen in the real world, and maybe someone sitting next to you and not wearing the headset doesn't experience that, but you're seeing it, feeling it, hearing it. So it is happening to you, okay? It's not fiction.
Okay.
And in that sense, if you're affected by it, it's not a placebo effect. It's a real effect, right?
Well, let's say that I agree with you on that sense, but let's say that the effect is something violent. My avatar's hand is cut off, something like this.
Okay.
And yeah, I could say you could take it really far to the effect that like maybe I can't even feel pain, maybe I can't even feel something, but like the thing that happened there didn't. Maybe the feelings that were the same feelings that were triggered, maybe the sensory functions were still triggered, but the thing itself, like my hand is still there.
Right, but it's not exactly a placebo effect. If you see, you did get some of the experience. It's a terrible example, okay? But if you see your avatar hand being cut, you're fully embodied in an avatar, and you see your hand being cut off, and let's say you even get haptic feedback, and you feel something that, I don't know, makes this experience more realistic, then again, this is happening to you. It's happening to you. Something is happening to you. So it really makes sense that you would remember this and maybe have a trauma. It's not a placebo effect. Okay, placebo effect is just thinking about something, but you're not just thinking about it. You're seeing it and feeling it and hearing it, perhaps, right? So that's why I think it's not exactly the same.
And this makes me want to. I want to ask you more. Have you thought more about discuss it quickly, but like the ethical implications of what how to hold people accountable for what they do in VR? Where do you think that this will, what direction will this head, or how will we govern these type of things in the future?
So there are many ethical questions. Yes, I have thought about it. There are many ethical questions to ask, and personally, I find ethical discussions very interesting. I didn't specifically think about the question of would people be accountable to things that they do in VR, but that's just one question out of a very large set of questions. We can talk about this, but I think in general, every new technology or ability comes with like a set of new ethical questions, right? And like virtual reality is not good or bad. You can do new things and new things can happen, and we would want to think about those things and kind of realize what we think is good or bad about them, or what is good or bad to do. So in that sense, I think ethical questions related to VR are not more interesting than other ethical questions. I don't know, about bioengineering or whatever.
But the interesting challenge here is that unlike every new technology brings new abilities or new powers or new responsibilities. But then I think the interesting question here is that okay, when cars were invented, yeah, you had the ability to drive in your car and buy your car, and you could also hurt people with your car, right? Right. But you were physically, if this was happening, you were physically hurting someone. We knew how to, as a society, we knew how to handle, to govern this. Right. In VR, how do you start governing, now, like you showed in the presentation, I have a real effect to impact other people for good or bad. Right. But as a society, I don't think we really know how to govern this at all.
Yet. We don't really know how to govern it yet, right? But we didn't know how to govern car accidents when, I don't know, people just started driving cars and the first time someone ran someone over, right? We didn't know how to handle this, and we learned how to handle this. So a lot of people asked themselves these questions, and then they decided something, and then in very specific situations, they needed to make other decisions, and this got evolved. And the same thing will happen in VR. So I don't think there is one, like if someone hurts someone else in a VR experience that they both share, is he responsible? Should he go to jail or something? I think that the answer is maybe, right? It depends what he's done, and what the whole situation was, and are there evidence, and the same kind of questions that you ask about any other situation that you would judge. So, and the fact that we're not able to handle this yet is really just, I think, a temporary thing. We will be able to handle this, and people will think about these things, just like, we are now thinking about the psychological effects, and people will think about, how do you say that? Law-related things? Sorry.
Judicial effects, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Oh, it's really interesting. I'm very jealous of your work.
Come join me. We can talk about this all day.
Well, we are finished with the questions. And I think, first of all, thank you so much. It was really interesting. And it just you answered so many questions and left me with so many more. So thank you. That's the mark of a great masterclass.
That's great. I will be happy to chat with anyone who wants to ask me more questions. I can upload, I didn't put it up there, but I have another slide with the resources and things that, if people want to read some more about some of the stuff that I was talking about. then.
Excellent. Please,
So,
share it with us, and then everyone, we will share it with you. And what is the best way for people to contact you?
Email is fine. It's
Email? Do you want
ayelet.batist@gmail.com.
Ayelet.batist@gmail.com. I'm sharing that in the chat for everyone who would like to follow up.
Okay.
And awesome. Sagi?
yeah, it's amazing. I am waiting to go over the slides again because I want to get. I need to see this again, like and this is a super interesting topic, and I can't wait for it to be, getting mainstream for us to all hit it like really hard.
So thank you so much, Ayelet. We really enjoyed this. And everyone, thank you guys for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed as well. You have Ayelet's email in the chat if you'd like to continue the discussion, and we will share all of the resources that we get from her with you. So that is all for now. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.